Thank you.
Senator Blunt.
Director Clapper, does RT get any of its broadcast into the United States?
Yes, it does some.
It does?
It's very prevalent in Europe and lesser so. I think there's an RT channel here.
And that would be a channel that would be accessible here to some number of people here.
Yes.
Let me,
I don't know the audience size of RT, but they
I
do.
doubt if it's very large, would be my guess, but I don't want to defend RT. I think it's a propaganda arm of a government that is definitely not on our side. And we need to be aware of that. We need to be aware that, I think you said at one point that I think at that point you meant the Russians think about this holistically and use many tools. We have lots of other countries, the Chinese particularly, that we also believe look holistically and use many tools. It's one of the topics, as you know from our other meetings over the years, I'm very concerned about cyber generally. I'm also concerned about our failure to secure federal records. I think we could certainly give advice to states as to how to secure their records since we've had intrusions into our personnel systems, since we've had hacking into the clearance process that a significant number of Americans, including all of you and most of us, have gone through that are very detailed. I was the state election official, chief election official in Missouri at one time, and those records, while it could be confusing on election day, I don't believe there's any evidence of polling places where people had lines that were backed up because there were record changes that were out of the ordinary. I mean, often people show up and say, oh, I know I sent my voter transfer in when they may or may not have. But Director Comey, we don't have any evidence of any disruption of the participation process because somebody got into local registration records. Is that correct?
That's correct, Senator.
It's also my opinion that in any state I'm aware of, there's nothing in those records that's not publicly available. You can go to the local registration office. You can often go directly into those records to access those records. Frankly, we have lost a lot more secure records at the federal level than the relatively open voter registration records. That doesn't mean that we don't want to help state and local officials secure their records in every way, but those are neither the most confidential records nor the hardest records to get into. And I guess for purposes of this discussion, most importantly, there's no indication that any effort to get into those records impacted Election Day. And I think you've all repeatedly said absolutely no indication that there was any intrusion into the vote counting process. I was a local election official when we first started counting ballots with computers, and one of my concerns always was that the security for how you'd verify that system was only really protected by how many of those systems were going on all over the country. The diversity of the system itself makes it fairly hard to manipulate. I don't know that we'd benefit by trying to standardize it either, but we would benefit by providing guidance on to how to secure those important records. No evidence, I think you said, Director Comey, that the Russians were able to get into Trump campaign email or other records or the current RNC records. Is that right?
That's correct.
So since we don't believe they got in, the fact that they had nothing to release should not be a shock. Since they didn't have the records.
Yep.
And we do believe they tried to get in?
I can't say with respect to the Trump campaign. With respect to the RNC, there's no doubt they hit an RNC domain. And so it could be they were aiming at the current one and just missed it and hit an old one. But I can't say for sure sitting here.
Well, I do know that the chairman of the RNC, I heard him say over the weekend, he thought they had done a better job securing their records. Whether that's true or not, I wouldn't know. I think I did read in one more than one published account, that the password to Mr. Podesta's email was password1 with a couple of variations of spelling of using capitals or something in password. So hopefully lots to be learned here, and thanks to all of you for your efforts to help us learn it.
Mr. Chairman, can I just, for the senator,